Your hand will hold me still, even when my world is shaking. Your hand will hold me still. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Hello, it is Tuesday, so welcome to our Tuesday night theology chat with Chumpy, where we go over some of the things from the sermon on Sunday. We try to define some terms, explain theological concepts that we go over in the sermon on Sunday, and we answer any questions that have come up from Sunday's sermon, or if you have any questions that come up from that you just remembered from Sunday morning, or something I say prompts that, feel free to put that in the comments and I will try and address that tonight. If I can't, I will try and look stuff up to get back to you as soon as I can. We're doing things a little differently this series because we're in the middle of the Moses series, and so we're kind of rushing through the story of Moses a little bit because there's a lot there. And so what we're doing is Pastor Melissa's preaching the story on Sunday morning, and then I'm trying to take and fill in some of the gaps, maybe some parts of the story that we're not able to get to on Sunday in the morning, or just some extra material that we aren't able to fit. We can't fit everything in on Sunday morning sermons, or else we would be there till Monday. So that's what I'm trying to do a little bit with this Moses series. One other thing, if there's any tech nerds watching, I hopefully have fixed the audio sync issue that was going on, where I looked like I was in a kung fu movie where my mouth was moving but the words were coming later. Hopefully that's fixed. If it's not, let me know and I'll work on that some more. But I figured out, I've done a lot of learning this year on different things, especially with regards to live streaming. So that was one of them that I learned this week, is how to fix the sync between the audio and video. Never know what you're going to get into. So with that said, we're going to jump in this week with Moses. This week we talked about, on Sunday morning, Pastor Melissa preached about the Passover. We did the first 9 plagues last week, and then this Sunday we did the 10th, which was the Passover, where the angel of death goes through and kills all the firstborn of Egypt, including Pharaoh's. And so that it's hard, it's difficult to understate. It's difficult to overstate the importance of the Passover in the identity of Israel. This is like the formative event in the life of Israel, because this is where God pulls them out of Egypt. They were in bondage, they were in slavery, and this is where God pulls them out. And so this is a big deal. And so when Moses goes to the Israelites, God has given them these instructions, and he goes through, and Pastor Melissa started explaining some of this stuff. He gives them detailed instructions, like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to kill the lamb, you've got to make sure you don't break any of the bones in the lamb, you got to take the blood from the lamb, and then you put it over the doorpost, and you put it on the sides of the doorpost. You don't just put it above, you put it on the sides too. And then you eat the meat. First of all, you roast it, you don't boil it, then you eat the meat in that house. There's a whole bunch of instructions that Moses gives the people, like, this is how it's to be done, and we got to do it this way. And the people listen. But it's just really interesting to go through and read chapter 12. he goes through and explains all of these detailed instructions on what God wants his people to do, for them to survive this plague, because his intent is that the people of Israel aren't touched. And that's what happens, because for once Israel follows instructions. But he gives all these detailed instructions. So I would encourage you to go ahead and read chapter 12 at some point of Exodus, just so that you can get a grasp on all these detailed instructions that these people were given. And so, with all that, this is, like we said before, the last plague of the 10, and excuse me, this is the last plague of the 10. And with all the other 9 plagues, Pastor Melissa talked last week about how each of these plagues kind of targeted one of the gods of Egypt. And so it was God showing the Egyptians, look, your gods mean nothing. I am the one true God, and I have power over the one that sticks in my mind, because Micah said, I like frogs, is the god of the Nile, Hapi. And Hapi, oh my word, the guy looks like a frog, and his name is Hapi. That just clicked in my head. Anyway, the one that sticks in my mind is, I think it's Happy, I don't know. Anyway, and so God gives them a plague of frogs, and so they've got frogs running everywhere. To say, look, I have power over frogs. Yeah, okay, big deal. And so we get to this last plague, and this is where it really, I mean, as if the other ones weren't a big deal, this is the one that hits home for Pharaoh. Yes, I was slow with the name Hapi. But this is the one that hits home with Pharaoh, because in Egyptian culture, the Pharaoh was also considered a god. It was kind of like in Roman culture, the Caesar was considered like a god. The Pharaoh was considered a god. And so in chapter 12, God tells Moses, he says, on the same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down, hold on, let me pull that up here. And I read part of this last week, but it says, on that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. He says, I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. And so, on this last one, I feel like Pharaoh is brought into this. And so his firstborn is killed in the Passover. And so now, all of a sudden, Pharaoh's like, okay, yeah, I've had enough. We're done here. And so he tells them to get out. But that's a little later in the chapter. The other thing that God tells them to do is he has them eat this meal. It's the Passover meal. Moving on to my next point here. The Passover meal, he says to take the meat of the lamb that you slaughter, and then after you put the blood on the doorpost, you're to roast this lamb, and you're to eat the lamb. You're supposed to have this unleavened bread, which, if you don't know, unleavened bread is bread without yeast, because when you bake bread, if you put yeast in it, if you've never baked bread, well, we usually make the bread for the communion, and we do use yeast on that one. And that we leave sit overnight. So that takes like a good 8 hours or so for it to rise up. But they didn't have time for that. So God says, you're to eat unleavened bread. It is not to have yeast in it, because it's not going to have time to rise. So don't even put the yeast in it. But he gives them these instructions for this Passover meal. And Pastor Melissa talked about that on Sunday, so I'm not going to go over that a whole lot. What I wanted to talk about is, I said before, this Passover event was so important to the identity of the Jewish people. And so God tells them, you are to continue celebrating this meal, this festival, every year from here on out, so that you remember what happened here. You were in bondage. I pulled you out. And this meal that you're going to have every year, this celebration, will remind you of this. And so Jews today still celebrate Passover. They still eat this Passover meal. And I wanted to, if you've never seen that, kind of what they have this. Now I will throw this disclaimer out there. I'm not an expert on the Seder meal, but this is what the Seder meal is. They have this plate full of these little items here. They've got the matzah, which is the unleavened bread. Yeah, I'm pointing to it with my cursor as if you could see that. And they've got a cup of wine there. But each of these items on the plate is something. There's a meaning to it. And so there's a roasted lamb shank bone on there, which obviously you don't eat the bone. But that is to commemorate the lamb that was sacrificed on the night that the Hebrews fled out of Egypt. So the very thing that we read about in this story is commemorated in this Seder meal. There's a roasted egg on there, and usually the egg is not eaten, but I've seen a couple things. One is that the egg is symbolic of springtime and renewal, and so this is like the new life that they're being given as they are brought out of Egypt. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the Jewish Seder meal. There is maror, bitter herb, and they say that any one of a bunch of different kind of bitter herbs can be put in here, but horseradish is usually the most common one that they use. And it says bitter herbs bring tears to the eyes and recall the bitterness of slavery. And so as you eat this, you're to be reminded that your people were enslaved and that this is what you were brought out of. The karoset is a sweet salad of apples, nuts, wine, and cinnamon that's supposed to represent the mortar that the Hebrew slaves used to make bricks. Karpas is a green vegetable, and they apparently use parsley often, but other spring greens can get used there. And that symbolizes the freshness of spring. And I think, from what I've read, like some different places use different. It's kind of a little bit of a cultural thing where things shift as far as what exactly is used. But then there's also kazaret, which is another bitter herb that they often use romaine lettuce or leafy greens of another plant. And there is, I don't think it's on that picture there. No, but there's also a little thing of salt water that they will dip the greens in. And the salt water symbolizes the tears and the sweat of the Hebrews as they were enslaved. And then finally, the other two things are the matzah, which again represents the unleavened bread that the Israelites were told to have and eat as a part of this meal. And then the wine there, which is just another part of the Seder meal. Some of them aren't eaten. Like I said, the lamb bone, they don't sit and gnaw on that, and the egg are not eaten, but they are a part of this symbolic meal. And so I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, but that is what Jews to this day still celebrate every year when Passover time comes around. They have this meal and they go through the story. So as they come to each part, they will read a section of the story and they will talk about what this means and why they're eating this. And so it's just a way for them to remember and be reminded, you were enslaved and God has brought you out. So just as we have our symbolic things that we do every year to remind us of the story of Jesus, this is one that they do. So that is just a little tidbit of knowledge for you. Another thing that I wanted to highlight from this section of the story, this was kind of a small chunk of the story, so there's not a whole lot of extra information to throw in here. But I wanted to highlight the urgency of Moses' instructions, because he's telling them, be ready to go. Everything that you read in that chapter is like, in fact, as I was reading it this week, I'm like, I feel like he's saying it quickly, even, which for Moses is hard because he's a slow talker. But he's saying, you got to do this, you got to do this. Come on, get this stuff together. You got to be ready to go, folks. Got to go. There's a real sense of urgency here because it's about to happen. He goes to the people. He says, "Look, this is the night it's going to happen. You got to be ready to go." Okay. In fact, I'm going to read, here it is. Verses 10 and 11. He says, "Do not leave any of it till morning." He's talking about the meal. "If some of it is left till morning, you must burn it." He said, "Look, don't put the leftovers in the fridge. We're not going to have time for that. This is how you're to eat it, with your cloak tucked up into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." He's saying, look, we're going to eat, but we're going to be eating ready to walk out the door because any moment now this could happen. Okay? He tells them to wear your sandals, like be ready to go. Like I said, don't put any yeast in the bread because it's not going to have time to rise. We're going to be heading out. Pastor Melissa brought up, he tells them to gird your loins. And I think that's what he's saying here when he says, eat it with your cloak tucked up in your belt. Now, I'm going to drop some knowledge on you right now. If you did not know what girding your loins was, you're about to learn. Because I found this awesome infographic. So the people in biblical times, they wore these tunics or robes and stuff. And so it is not very conducive to doing things like going into battle or getting ready to go running somewhere or whatever. So you see the guy in the top left there. That's kind of what they wore. And so what they did was they would gird up their loins. They'd hike up that skirt and grab, which is the second panel there. And then the third one, they would pull it forward. And then you go down to the bottom left. Excuse me. They would wrap it underneath between their legs and then wrap it around the front and tie it off. And that, folks, is how you gird your loins. So now you know. Don't say I never taught you anything. But this is what he's talking about when he tells them to gird your loins. Like, be ready to go, because if you're still dressed in your moving around slowly tunic, you're gonna be tripping over yourself as we try and get out of Egypt here. Like, we got to be ready to go, people. So that's what he's telling them. Everything about what he's what he's saying to the Israelite people here is, we're going to have this Passover meal. There's going to be a plague. The angel of death is going to pass through, and then we got to be ready to split. Okay? Now, as Pastor Melissa pointed out on Sunday, what does this have to do with us? We are not Israelites enslaved to Egypt right now. However, this whole scenario, this whole story, is kind of a precursor. A lot of times in the Bible, things will happen here. I just realized. There. I'm trying to look on the screen. This is hard. I could never be a weatherman because they have to do everything backwards. Things happen here, and then over here, there's something else that happens that this foreshadowed. Okay? So this is like a precursor to this event over here. This is one of those cases. God, through the Passover, pulls Israel out of Egypt. Okay? The Passover lamb is sacrificed. Okay? And then, because of that, the Israelites are brought out of the bondage in Egypt. Man, I cannot talk tonight to save my life. This is all foreshadowing or a precursor to Jesus Christ showing up on the scene. He is sacrificed as the spotless lamb so that we can be brought out of the bondage of sin. Okay? He is called countless times throughout Scripture. He's made reference to him as the Passover lamb or the Paschal lamb. It is the formative story of the Israelite people, but it also leads into, like I said, the story of Jesus, his sacrifice, so that we could have freedom. Okay, so it is the formative story of the Israelite people, but it's also our own story because that leads into ours, and then even to the point of where in this story, and this is something I never noticed before this most recent time reading through, it even says, "Don't break the bones of the lamb." Okay, in the story of Jesus, like it says, there were no bones broken. Okay. There's so many corollaries between the Passover story and the crucifixion that it's just beyond a doubt that the two are really connected. And so that is why it's important for us, because that story is our story, and the freedom that we've gotten from sin and enslavement to all of our sins or addictions. That has come because of the sacrifice of Jesus. And so that's where our story ties in there. So that is all I've got for this week. Next week, this weekend, I should say, is our retreat. And so we are going to attempt to live stream at 10:30 on Sunday morning if you aren't going to be there. However, I can't guarantee the reliability of the network out there, so I'm hoping that we can still get everything live streamed as normal. So we'll see what happens there. Yes, my dad just pointed out we need to always be ready to go as well. As Christians, like, we need to be ready to whatever God calls us to be doing, whether it's our time to go or if it is God's calling us into something. We need to be ready to follow God when he calls us to do something. So that's all I have for this week. I'll see you all next week. I may not be doing Theology Chat this Tuesday because of retreat, but then we'll be back the week after. So I will see you all Sunday, or if not, some other time.